Hi everybody, today I have Andrea with me and we are going to talk about FEDC 3. We did this presentation before in 2024's New York ICDL conference. So here we go. The title of our talk today is Unveiling Intentionality in Two-Way Communication, Nurturing Functional Emotional Developmental Capacity 3. So there are three good reasons why we want to talk about FEDC 3 today. The first reason is that FEDC 3 marks the beginning of two-way communication, social reciprocity. So FEDC 3 is the crossroad between motor and verbal communication. So this is where the OT will meet the ST, the yin and the yang, the east meets the west. So with this, we need to be very careful how the transition happens very miraculously, and we're going to help support the kid in this area. We also want to work on this foundational capacity because it gets us longer and longer back and forth interaction and to build nice foundation for attention. So all these good stuff really boils down to this neat little FEDC. The hallmark of FEDC 3 is intentionality. Intentionality. Have a look at this picture. So this little boy, he is full of ideas. He's full of mischief. And you can really guess what he's up to next. Boy, does he have a purpose in his life, okay? Look at that face. So having a purpose is really, really important. So our job as clinicians is to help the child that we are looking at to take the initiative through that purpose, through that cause that he has. So having that purpose is the first step of meaningful communication. So in today's talk, we are going to focus on 3 points. So first, we are going to understand what intentionality is by looking at purposeful play interaction with a child. Next, we are going to highlight precursory skills needed to develop intentionality. Lastly, we will also be discussing strategies to help promote intentionality and two-way communication. This is so that when you are doing the floor time, you know exactly what to look out for and you would know exactly how to help mend and grow the intentionality with the child that you're working with in front of you. First, we are going to start with the definition of intentionality. So what is intentionality? Intentionality is doing things on purpose with intent. Intentionality is also an attitude of purposefulness and a commitment to deliberate action. So basically, it has been thought through and the action follows that idea. It is not random by any nature. So Greenspan used these works to talk about intentionality. He says that as a child participates in casual or logical interaction, they are able to distinguish the action of others from one's own, and there's a me doing something to a not me. So consciousness also grows through when baby experience their will and the sense of purpose. So if we were to break this down, there is a understanding of cause and effect, and then there will be a sense of reality of me doing something to a not me. And as the baby experience, their will and the effects of what is happening through their action, they develop this sense of purpose and consciousness will start to grow. And when consciousness grows through this intentionality, it reinforces itself and the actions become more and more pronounced and deliberate over time. So how does intentionality look like in a play setting? So first, there is an enticement, then there is an idea, and there is a motor plan, and subsequently cues, gesture, and sound all align according to the initial idea, and they follow through that initial idea. So if we have a look here with the boy that's reaching out for the airplane, so there's an enticement. The airplane is there for him. There is an idea. He wants to take it. the motor plan is for him to raise his arms to go get the airplane. So basically, you see his smile, which is his cues. You see his action, where his hands reach out for it, and perhaps he's saying, thank you. He's making some sounds that line up with the initial idea. So the cues, gesture, and sound all align to the initial idea. In our practice, sometimes cues, gesture, or sound may be non-traditional in some of the kids that we see, and they may make us guess a little bit more. But as attuned adults, we need to be very keen observer so that we are able to understand the intentionality behind the cues, the gesture, or the sound that the child is showing us, so that we can help respond appropriately and also to help grow the intentionality. Moving on, I'm going to pass the time to Andrea, and she will lead us into a video segment and a discussion section.
We took a clip from The Big Bang Theory. It is one of my favorites, and I couldn't help but just love this clip when we were talking about intentionality and interactions with our patients and clients. So while we're watching this clip, we want all of you guys to reflect on, while you're watching it between Sheldon and Amy, are you seeing intentional two-way communication between both partners? Reflecting on, is this interaction, is this communication a shared reciprocal interaction between Sheldon and Amy, or does it feel like a different type of interaction? So we're going to watch it and then we'll discuss it real briefly.
Leonard gave me the most incredible gift, a trip to a historic railway, and I get to operate an actual locomotive.
Wow. You finally used it? What'd you do?
No idea. All I know is I'm gonna be working on the railroad all the livelong day.
Well, I'm really happy for you.
Oh, no, it's not just me. The railway is 4 hours from the nearest airport, and guess who gets to drive me?
I give up.
You!
No, I really give up.
On the first day, I get to drive a steam engine. On the second day, a diesel engine. Oh, and if I volunteer to do track maintenance and paperwork, they'll let me stay as long as I want. So you might want to pack enough clothes for the rest of our lives.
Can I pee now?
Oh, get this. I get to take a test based on a 125-page manual. I get to learn things like hand signals. Whoa, there's forward, the reverse, you set the brakes. Are you done yet? You're missing some great stuff out here. Oh, this is good. There are dozens of railroad crossings you have to blow the whistle for. That is the figurative you, not the literal you. I'll be blowing the whistle. Amy, get up. It's time to go to work.
One of the things we want you guys to think about is, did you feel that this was an intentional, reciprocal, shared interaction between Sheldon and Amy representing FEDC 3? Yes or no? And so we saw in this clip that while Sheldon was very passionate, Sheldon had a lot of intentionality within his own motivations, his own desires, that there was not a shared and intentional communication, two-way communication between Sheldon and Amy. We saw a very one-sided conversation where Sheldon was talking very passionately about going to the trains. However, he didn't allow that reciprocity to shine through between him and Amy, oftentimes missing cues of interaction and intentionality, such as when Amy needed to use the restroom and things like that. And Sheldon wanted to continue to talk about what it was that he was going to be able to do when he went to the train station. So now we're going to watch a second video, again from The Big Bang Theory. We chose 2 Big Bang Theory clips because we wanted to see that progression in the interaction between Sheldon and Amy from the beginning all the way to the very end. So in this clip, we want you guys to compare what you saw in the first clip in the interaction between Sheldon and Amy and what you are seeing now in this second clip of that shared reciprocal intentionality and communication.
Sheldon, I don't know what the future holds, but I know that I've never been happier than I am in this moment marrying you.
Well, that was unexpectedly beautiful. I might need a minute.
Amy. I usually know exactly what to say. But in this moment, I have no words. I guess I'm overwhelmed by you. In a good way. Not in the elevator in the haunted mansion way. Even if I can't tell you now how I feel, I will spend my life showing you how much I love you.
Do you? Do you?
Hey, I'm just saying I'm here if you need me to step in.
No. I got this. Amy, do you take Sheldon for your lawful wedded husband?
I do.
And Sheldon, same thing.
I do.
And by the power vested in me, by even you can perform weddings.com, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride.
So within this second clip, we saw a very different type of communication, a very different type of intentional, shared, reciprocal back and forth between Sheldon and Amy. We were able to see that use of pacing, right? We saw Sheldon and Amy definitely supporting each other, talking at the same rate, talking at the same speed, having that volley back and forth in their pacing, in their communication towards one another. We also saw that use of co-regulation. We noticed that both Sheldon and Amy were very nervous within this video, but they were holding each other's hands. They were providing each other sensory feedback. They were providing each other affective cueing and signaling to support their co-regulation. We saw that sense of connectedness, that sense of shared reality between Sheldon and Amy, and we saw the continuity in their interaction, in their communication within this second clip, demonstrating that shared, reciprocal, back and forth, intentional two-way communication.
Boils down to a nice question. So why is this continuity important? So a continuous flow of communication is really important because it develops that sense of reality and is great for regulating behavior and emotion. So if a child were to alternate between a world by himself and a shared one, he only gets sample of reality and not a continuous picture of it. I bet you were wondering why there were random pictures flashing across the screen in the last 8 seconds. Have you ever considered that this may be what is perceived by a child who is only able to share moments of engagement and capture moments of shared reality with us? This can be really disorienting for the child. And do you feel a sense of relief when we are finally able to figure out what that series of 4 pictures is really talking about when you look at that video? When a child is attending to the world and interacting to the world in a continuous fashion, he gets feedback from his environment, and a child can then interpret a mom's stern look or a daddy's gesture so that he's able to tell when they are getting a little bit annoyed with him, and he can then get that social cue to be able to know what he should do to reciprocate in return. So does he really want to go ahead with his behavior and continue to annoy them, or does he want to tone down? Okay, so these are decisions that he can make once he can recognize and can read their signals well. So in short, if a child is able to participate in a continuous sense of reality, he's able to then regulate his behavior, moods, and emotion more effectively. The opposite is also true. So think about a mother who is trying to soothe the crying baby or a crying child and trying to calm the child down. So, of course, this gesture is going to be more effective if a child is connected to her in reality the whole entire time. So it is the continuity is really important for both co-regulation for a caregiver and also for a child in terms of regulating his behavior and his emotions. So then we want to find out what precursory skills are we thinking about when we are thinking about developing this FEDC 3.
Awesome. So when we're thinking about precursory skills, we want to think about what is it that we are hoping to support and that we are hoping that our children and our clients are able to access in order to support their ability to establish and develop that intentionality within FEDC 3. So one of the first skills that we want to think about, one of the first precursory areas, is their level of arousal. So when we're thinking about arousal, we want to keep in mind that there is no perfect level of arousal. However, there is an optimal level of arousal based on the activity, based on the interaction, and based on what you and your client are doing together. So you'll see in both of these pictures on this slide, in the top picture, we see a little girl that is looking at a book with her mom, her therapist, a caregiver, whoever it may be. Their arousal level is at a lower level because they're quietly engaging in this book together. However, their arousal level is matched for the activity that it is that they are participating in. Versus the second picture, we see a group of children and it looks like they're playing tag or something along those lines. So it's likely to assume that their arousal level is at a much higher level than what we see in that first picture. However, both arousal levels are perfectly appropriate for that intentionality because it's matching the needs for the interaction for the situation at hand. So we want to keep in mind that arousal, there's going to be that constant and continuous ebb and flow based on the interaction, based on the activity, and based on what it is that's going on within that intentional two-way communication together. We want to be, as clinicians, as caregivers, as therapists, we need to be mindful of our child's arousal level. We want to use our therapeutic use of self, our co-regulation, and our attunement in order to support that optimal level of arousal for the activity, for the interaction within that moment. Okay. After arousal, we want to think about our child's motor system. When we're thinking these precursory skills, we didn't order them in terms of highest to lowest. We just put in those precursory skills. So all of these are just as important as the other. So it's not a hierarchy of one to the other. But when we're thinking precursory skills, we want to think about the motor system. So that motor system is that big overarching umbrella for these other smaller components that make up the motor system. So we want to think about the child's praxis system. We want to think about their postural support and their postural stability, and we want to think about the child's muscle tone. In the child with special needs, Dr. Greenspan said that children with motor planning challenges also have problems with gestural communication. They often have a hard time learning that they can signal intentionally, key word being intentionally, to get what they want because they have difficulty forming the gestures, and their gestures are often misunderstood. So this ties very, very much into that motor system and making sure that we're supporting all areas of our child's motor system so that they can access their body in order to intentionally gesture, in order to intentionally communicate. So when we're thinking of praxis, we want to think about our child's ability to come up with those ideas, to come up with how to move their body, to come up with that intentional communication. When we're thinking that postural support, what kind of support is our child currently receiving from the environment? How can we help to provide them with a different level of support if it's not allowing them that optimal postural stability in order to access their body for intentionality? And then that muscle tone. If we have a child with higher or lower muscle tone, how might that be impacting their ability to intentionally communicate with us what it is that they're wanting, either gesturally or with spoken words? We want to look at how the child is using their own body? Are they having to focus so hard on supporting their body and supporting their motor skills and their motor movements that they're not able to access their system for that intentionality? We want to look at how we are supporting both the praxis and the postural stability, because this is going to allow our children the freedom of motor movements in order to be able to initiate those intentional, purposeful interactions. We want to make sure that we remember that intentionality with an interaction first starts with gestures. Again, that's why we focus on that motor system so much. We want to make sure that the child has that body access to be able to utilize their gestures to communicate, to provide that intentionality within the interactions. When we're thinking in motor system and motor control and praxis, we want to remember the foundation of presumed competence. When we have children who have praxis challenges or motor control challenges, it might be more difficult for them to coordinate their motor skills, their arms, their hands, their body in order to clearly and effectively and efficiently communicate. However, we want to presume that competence in every gestural attempt that our children are providing with us and every motor attempt that our children are providing within those interactions. A couple of ideas that you can do to help support that motor system is look at that postural. Look at where the child is positioned, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later when we're talking about supports. But we want to look at how we can support that postural system. We also want to consider, is it better to work in close proximity for the child, not requiring the child to cover so much distance or so much space for that intentional communication. And then we want to be able to support that motor planning and sequencing through their motor movements. So after the motor system, we want to look at the rhythmical pacing. We want to look at that volley of that back and forth interaction between us and the child that we're working with. We want that time, that responding and waiting time. We want to make sure that we're not moving too fast, that we're not providing the time for the child to process and respond. But we also want to make sure that we're not moving so slow that we potentially lose that connection and that intentionality between us. Tied to the motor system, we want to think about that praxis when we're thinking of that rhythmical pacing. How is our child accessing their praxis system, and how is their praxis system efficiently processing and responding to the information that we are providing, as well as the information they are wanting to provide to us? That, again, that intentionality. So if we are working with a child that has challenges within their praxis system, it can provide difficulties or challenges, constrictions within that timely response. So giving that time, being patient, allowing that wait for the child to provide that intentional response to us. Additionally, the child's processing of motor, auditory, and visual information can constrict their communication attempts and may also be impacted by their praxis systems. When we're thinking that rhythmical pacing, we want to keep the interaction cooking. We want to keep the interaction interesting. We can do this by varying the speed, varying the pacing slightly. It's slightly, again, just those slight challenges, those slight changes, to help increase that intentionality and that excitement within the interaction. We want to make sure that we have a rhythm and that we have a rhythm established and it's predictable, because that's going to help our child with that intentionality as well. We want to make sure that we are being mindful of the child's individual differences, and we'll talk more about this in just a moment, but being mindful of those individual differences and how might that be impacting their rhythmical pacing within that intentionality. All right, so like I said, we're going to talk about those individual differences. We want to make sure that we are supporting all areas of the child's individual differences in order to allow them that full system access for that intentionality. By looking at the individual differences, this is going to help to promote that safety and relationship formation within the interaction, within our relationship with the child that we're working with. By supporting that safety, by establishing that relationship, that's going to provide so much more intrinsic motivation for the child to want to intentionally interact and communicate with us. Because if they're feeling safe, if they have that strong relationship connection, that's going to provide that intrinsic desire and motivation for them to want to continue that back and forth interaction with us. So we want to look at the child's sensory regulation and processing. How are they processing different sensory inputs? How are these inputs supporting their intentionality within the interaction? Or how are various sensory inputs possibly constricting their intentionality within the interaction? We want to be mindful of our use of language. We don't want to use too much language that it's overwhelming for the child. We want to use that just right challenge of the amount of language, spoken language that we're using, but as well as nonverbal communication. We want to be mindful of both verbal, spoken communication and nonverbal communication within our interactions. We need to be aware of the child's background and history, family background, medical history, school, all of those pieces, because by being mindful and aware of that, it's going to really help to support that safety and relationship connection. We need to be aware of both the big T traumas and little t traumas that this child may have encountered within their life. Again, being mindful of these pieces will help for that establishment of that safety and relationship. And then we want to always consider those strengths and those interests, right? We are a strengths-based model. We want to consider what those strengths and interests are, because that's going to give us clues and guides as to what we might want to bring into the play, into the interaction to support that intentionality. Because if it's something that we know that the child is interested in, if it's something that we know that the child is motivated by, then that naturally is going to help to promote and support that intentionality within the interaction. We want to make sure that we are being mindful and honoring all of their play intentions, all of their play interactions, even if we feel like it's being repetitive, right? Because that repetitive can tie into those individual differences. So we want to honor what it is that our children are bringing with them from a play standpoint and an interaction standpoint. We also want to make sure that, again, within that individual differences, that we're incorporating a variety of those sensory inputs that we know are supportive for the child that we're working with. Because if we're supporting their regulation through those various sensory modalities, then it's going to further help to promote that intentionality within the interaction.
Okay, so next we are going to look at emotional sharing and facial expression. So emotional sharing and facial expression basically points to how the children convey a message across. So it can be a facial expression, it can be a effective cue, it can be touching, reaching, where the children are trying to tell you something. So, and overall, basically is the way that they are trying to express their emotion within themselves, and they're going to express it to you. Similarly, they can be using gesture to communicate. So we need to be very mindful of the gesture and the cues because these gestures or these cues are really important. Gestures are an expression of the child's desire, and gesture translates to the child's wishes, desires, feelings, and also to talk about gestures translate into her feelings, desires and feelings into a way of communication. So words do the same way for children as well, but in a more abstract way. So overall, if we are very good at looking out for cues and gestures, the more we acknowledge the cues and gestures that the children are showing us, the more we reciprocate in an appropriate manner, the more we are going to get to grow them over time. So if a child has difficulties with cue reading and cue sending, then it will substantially impact on their social exchanges, and this will lead to a one-sided conversation, which we have seen from the beginning of our talk today. So we need to grow this nonverbal skill, because even if a child is in the verbal stage, we will need them to be more successful with the back and forth rhythm, like what Andrea has said, and the back and forth ability to read intentionality and to respond to other people's intentionality. So all these pre-verbal skills are going to be more solidified and more concrete if they are able to work on this stage with them. So even if the child is talking, especially these verbal children, we may help with their language skills if we were to look at this pre-verbal level. Next, we also want to look at emotional reciprocity and intimacy. So if we're thinking about affective signaling, in the beginning, the children experience positive, regulated, affective emotion, where the caregiver tailors their interaction to the baby's unique biology. And through all these positive interaction, the child is able to then forge sensory affect motor connections. These affective connections are really helpful because of affect diathesis hypothesis. We know that through this theory and through the forging of these nice sensory affective motor connection, that the children is going to start to read and respond to social signals. Next, we also think about a child's ability to then discriminate a caregiver's voice and affective signal, and to discriminate their emotional interests, and to recognize social significance through facial expression and vocalization. So this transformation occurs, and the child is then able to slowly discriminate between what is extreme versus what might be enticing and not in such extreme. When this happens, a child is able to then be able to broaden their emotional range. In the third stage, a child begins to then master purposeful two-way communication. And when this happens, the caregiver and the child can have a conversation through emotional signaling, and a child can then have a conversation without words. In the fourth stage, a child can then be able to sustain a continuous back and forth interaction in order to then collaborate with a caregiver in solving effective, meaningful problems. So when you have that, back and forth in a rhythmic volley, like what Andrea has described, then you get to this nice place where you can see in this picture, this girl is obviously having a lot of emotional signaling to the daddy, and the daddy is also emotionally signaling back. And this is a sense of togetherness, and this is intimacy. So we need to be comfortable with a two-way communication, and then we can build this intimacy. So in the process of building intimacy, we have been communicating. So intimacy itself is a form of communication, and it is through communication that we are building intimacy between the caregiver and the child. Next, we want to talk about communication. One might assume that an individual's first spoken words, such as mama or baba, are their first words. But in fact, communication begins long before that. Communication is, in fact, any gesture, any sound, any intonation, a little sneaky look, or a glance. So all these nice pre-verbal, purposeful communication are signposts that a child's communication is coming along. So the smile, a frown, a giggle, looks of surprise, annoyance, or delight, all these are real signposts of that true source of growing logic and that sense of self and that intelligence that is growing within the child. So nonverbal intentionality continues to grow even though the child is verbal, and it is important to help grow that communication through reciprocating the child's intentionality. Because we are looking at intentionality, we are consistently referring to what the child is interested in and what their desires are, because that would help point us to the key. So be it pre-verbal gestures, be it spoken language, be it any form of communication through AAC or sign language, by looking and tuning in to the child's intentionality, that's how we are going to grow their communication. This works for analytic language learners as well as just taught language learners. Just taught language processors also follow the same process too. When they initiate a phrase or a script that might be learned from a movie or might be something that they have coined, it is our job to help support the children through to figure out what these scripts mean and what their intentionality is. So we might be also mindful that we are not to take the script literally or semantically as we understand it from the English language, but sometimes their scripting or the echolalia is their way of communicating their intentionality, and we have to be really mindful what their intentionality is so that we can reciprocate and validate. As we do so, they would feel heard and they would be validated as communicators. So lastly, we want to look at a child's strength and interest by tuning into these strengths and interests, such as through their preferred toys, through their preferred movie shows, or through their sensory motor play, we can then use this motivating play and joint activities to encourage a child or a teen to sustain longer and longer chains of back and forth gesturing or verbal dialogue about an idea. So families and professionals must prioritize the fundamental human experience of social turn-taking, whether through spoken language or alternative forms of communication such as sign or typing. So we have to be mindful that communication grows when we grow their intentionality through the child's interests and desires. And so by tuning into their motivation, we're going to help grow that communication with intentionality.
So now we are going to move from the precursory skills that Naomi and I were just talking about to different ideas and strategies that we can keep in mind when we are supporting the development and growth of intentionality in our child or client's interactions and communication. So one of the things, this ties back to that motor system, we want to think about positioning. How are we positioning ourselves in relation to the child or the client that we're working with to best support the intentionality of communication? When we're considering positioning, we want to be mindful of the child's or the client's individual differences, because for some of the children that we're working with, some of these positions or some of these strategies might provide too much sensory information for them or be overwhelming, and therefore not supportive of that intentionality within communication. So couple of different ideas that we can consider that we can be thinking of when we're thinking positioning is, can we do face-to-face play? When we're doing that face-to-face play, it really supports that mirror neuron firing within our brains. And that really is known to help to support that intentional interaction communication. But that doesn't mean face-to-face is the only way that we can support that mirror neuron firing. For some of our children, for some of our clients, face-to-face positioning can be too much information, can be overwhelming for their individual differences and their sensory profiles. And so if that's the case, we do not want to necessarily do face-to-face play. But can we play in a mirror? Can we both be facing a mirror, and therefore we're able to reference each other? We're able to see what it is that the other is looking at. We're still getting some of that mirror neuron firing, but it takes away some of that face-to-face pressure or individual difference overstimulation that could occur. Other positions that we might want to consider is side-by-side play. We saw in a few slides back when the girl and the woman were looking at the book, they were still able to socially reference each other for that intentionality of that interaction while looking at the book together. However, they were laying side by side next to each other. Other positions that we might want to be mindful of or consider is, can we position our bodies so that we are slightly below the eye gaze of the child that we're working with? This way it allows the child, when they're ready, when they are initiating that intentional gaze towards us, to have full access to us without having to challenge their motor system or their postural stability by looking up or looking around for us. When we're thinking positioning, what we want to be mindful of is, how is our positioning allowing that support and that development of that intentionality? We want to be able to imitate what it is that our child is doing, imitate those facial expressions. This is such a great way to start looking at some of those silly facial expressions. So we smile and then we stick out our tongue and then we make silly faces, always increasing some of that play and that interaction for that intentionality. This also, by thinking of positioning and being mindful where we're positioning ourselves in relation to the child we're working with, this allows us easier access to be able to see where the child's eye gaze is going. Are they gazing towards the ball, or are they gazing towards the train? Whatever it is that they are looking towards, by being mindful of where we are positioning ourselves, it's going to help us to be able to see what it is that our child is non-verbally intentionally communicating that they are interested or enticed by. That positioning also supports that shared enjoyment and pleasure while encouraging that intimacy. Intimacy, remember, is that precursor for intentionality. The child has to be comfortable with that connection with us to be able to initiate and follow through and carry out that intentional communication with us in those interactions. Another thing that we want to be mindful of, another strategy, is being animated. We want to be as animated as possible, but we want to do this within our own true, genuine selves. We don't want to over-animate. We don't want to do something that's not authentic to the interaction, to the situation, or to who we are as an individual within our own individual differences. Because our children are going to know, they're going to know if it's not genuine and if it's not true to the situation. And so we want to be mindful that we are being as animated as possible, but we're being as animated as possible while staying genuine to us and to the interaction. When we're considering animation, we want to make it bigger. We want to over exaggerate it because this is going to allow our children that processing of what it is that we are demonstrating, of what it is that we're modeling, of the gestures that we're utilizing. And so sometimes over exaggerating that while staying genuine to the interaction is such a supportive technique to support and foster that intentionality. When we're thinking animation, however, we want to make sure that we're always being mindful of the child's individual differences and their responses to that animation. We want to constantly be monitoring to make sure that we're not providing too much information or too little information that the child is unable to receive it. When we're thinking animation, we want to think about our facial expressions. We want to think about use of gestures with our hands and our arms, but also our full body gestures, our full body movements. We want to think about our vocal intonation, our pitch, our pace, our rhythm. All of those pieces are going to be a component of that animation. Sometimes when we're thinking about animation, using bigger gestures, using bigger animation allows our children with praxis or timing challenges to be able to process the information that we are providing them, to allow them that ability to intentionally respond because they're processing the information in a more effective way. We want to vary our voice and our voice signals. We want to make sure that our tone is matching the interaction and matching what it is that we're doing, such as, uh-oh, yay, and so on and so forth. So one of the other strategies that we want to always consider is how can we help our children to succeed, right? We want to help them to succeed. We want to make sure that we are always being mindful and keeping in mind presumed competence. We want to treat every single thing that our child does within the interaction as intentional. By doing so, we're going to support that we are responding to the child. By treating everything as intentional, we are going to help them to feel intrinsically intentional because we're responding to everything that it is that they're doing and responding positively to everything it is that they're doing. By providing them that response, it's going to then help to promote them to try again and to try again and to try again and keep that intentionality flowing with us in that interaction. In The Child with Special Needs, Dr. Greenspan said that by building on your child's interests, you can create a link between his or her behavior and their emotions. You enable the behavior to feel purposeful and to build on the sense of self. That's exactly what we're doing with presumed competence. We're building on their sense of self and we're treating everything as intentional to support that interaction of purposeful communication with us. So when we're thinking about purposeful interaction, how can we help to support that? We want to join them in what it is that they're showing us that's motivating and interesting. We want to use toys and activities which we know the child is interested in, which we know the child is successful with playing with, that they've shown us that they want to play with before or have played with before. And that's truly a desired play activity. And we want to build on their natural interests. By building on their natural interests, we're naturally going to help to support, foster, and grow that intentionality of the interactions. So one of the other things that we want to consider, this goes back to that pacing and that rhythmical timing, is the gift of time. We want to make sure that we are giving our children the gift of time to intentionally initiate an interaction, as well as to respond to us within that interaction. We need to make sure that we are being mindful of the child's individual differences, their praxis system, their auditory system, their visual system, all of those pieces, because that can that can impact how quickly our children are able to process and or respond intentionally to the interactions. So we want to give our children that gift of the time to be able to process and then respond. We want to allow that extra time. We want to make sure that we're considering all of those individual differences, like I just said. By doing this, this allows our children that opportunity for that reciprocal communication. When we're giving them that gift of time, when we're allowing that processing, this allows that reciprocity and that intentionality within the interactions. Additionally, by giving that gift of time, it allows our children to take the lead, to initiate those interactions, to show us what it is that they're interested in. Again, following that eye gaze, following those motivations of what it is that the child is showing us that they want to do, intentionally engage and interact with. By allowing that gift of time, it allows that child that first initiation to start the interaction. And how powerful is that for our children to have that gift, to have that first initiation for interaction? So we want to wait and we want to see what it is that our children are showing us that they're interested in.
Next, we're going to put it all into practical sense. So what does this really look like in a session? So how are we going to put all these ideas into a practical sense to help build the intentionality and the interaction, and what activities will be great for building this kind of capacity? So we want to think about simple, pickable games. So something like a blanket covering his eyes, covering the kid's eyes, like you see in this first picture. So this will be really great for getting that reciprocity going. Next, we also want to look at a simple hide and seek game. So like the one in the second picture, it's really simple. There's not much places to hide. There is just mommy closing her eyes and a kid trying to run away to hide behind scrawny little trees. It's a simple hide and seek game to get that back and forth going. Next, in the third picture, we are thinking about a rhythmic activity, something like a song or a freeze tag. So you could do simple songs like row, row, row your boat. And if you can, add in rhythmic movements into that activity so that that movement and that rhythm is going along while you're singing it. We also want to sort of be thinking about other sensory motor activities such as a stop and go game. So something like a swing or a jumping or a spinning activity that would be really helpful to get that rhythmic coordinated movement going. So all these nice games are really what can really help bring out that intentionality in children. Next, we want to think about how we can also stretch and increase that complexity. So now that you have that children getting that simple back and forth, we want to stretch that complexity. So how can we stretch that? So if you want to stretch that complexity while respecting the child's wants and desires. So you want to perhaps, position yourself in a different place, or you want to move the toy into a different place, somewhere a bit further from where he is at, somewhere that would basically challenge his motor planning a little bit, or, stretch his attention a little bit more so that he is able to go and crawl or move under a chair and so forth, just to get you that toy that he's really interested in. Or perhaps he wants to open the door, you can offer him help, and he is able to show you where he wants you to put your hand in to help pull open something. So if that is the case, you might think about how you might position yourself differently. So you are always thinking about how you can extend or add circles of communication and how you can entice him more to take that initiative. You can also think about adding another item to add that complexity and to keep that flow going within that play. So if you look at the picture here, we have an Easter egg hunt. So you can basically be hiding different things in the room, or if you have an open area that you are playing in, you can always think about how you can hide 3 or 4 different items, if that's where your child can hold attention for, 3 or 4 different items within a smaller confined place, and then you can slowly increase the confines of or the borders of that place where he's supposed to look for. And lastly, we have to learn that we are not here to entertain, but we are here to reciprocate. So our job is not to clown around and to make sure that the child is entertained. Our goal is really to share the interaction and to be authentic in the way that we share the play experience and to share that gleam and that joy with that child. We want to make sure that the child is really actively engaged and involved. So this means that we are very mindful of our pacing. We are very mindful of the child's desires. We are very mindful of giving the child some space to initiate and to give his ideas and get his ideas across. And when we are able to see the child's cues in terms of gestures, in terms of affect, in terms of smiles, in terms of sounds, we are going to pause, look and think about what his intentionality is, and we are going to respond appropriately to what he's trying to say and trying to indicate. And through this, we are going to make that reciprocal back and forth rhythm, and we are going to help respond appropriately, and we are going to help grow the intentionality through the interaction that we are engaging him with. So this is how we are going to really help reciprocate and not to entertain. All right. So we have come, these are our references, and we have come to the end of our conversation today. These are our contact details should you need to contact us. We'll see you around the ITDL community. Bye-bye.